Today we are going to talk about disability in America. Not so much what it is specifically, though we'll touch on that, but more what it means from a functional standpoint, the difference between disability as an ADA definition versus disability as a social program, a participation in a social program. Let's start off with disability. Disability is a neutral label. Generally speaking, per the Americans with Disabilities Act, it denotes a substantial limitation in one or more of a major life activity. That's it. There's no value judgments attached to this label. There are several definitions of disability under the laws, but this definition will get us started for now. When you identify as a person with a disability, a common follow-up question, at least in the healthcare community, is, how long have you been on disability? Or unsolicited commentary on your insurance or your ability to pay. This is problematic for a number of reasons. Equating disability as we defined it, as a limitation in one or more of a major life activity, taking that definition of disability and conflating it with financial status is incredibly problematic. A lot of people who have disabilities do have financial struggles, but that's a societal issue. There are many factors that play into that. There are also a lot of people living with disabilities who aren't on disability, Social Security disability. They're not, they could be stay-at-home moms. They could be working full-time careers. They're you and me. We're everywhere. People with disabilities are everywhere, and a lot of disabilities are not apparent. So you won't even know that the person on the bus with you has a disability. What you usually see is their assist device. You may see that. So you may see that they're using a walker, or they're using a wheelchair, or you may see a cane or a service animal. But you really don't know who out there has a disability and doesn't. We are your counterparts in society. We are everywhere. So conflating disability, conflating the fact that a person has a disability with their work status or their financial status is a leap that never has to happen, and it shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't be happening to any marginalized communities. It is showing bias, an inherent assumption that if you have a disability, you are poor, you have no money. If there's a reason for an entity to know that, if there's a reason for a healthcare provider to know if you need help with payment or with programs, all they have to do is ask you, is that something that I can offer you? But the leap without a reason is bias. Let's see. The question of how long have you been on disability is showing that bias. It's immediately equating the disability with the Social Security disability program specifically, though possibly other support programs as well. And it outlines that the person cannot, the Social Security disability program for participation in it, outlines that the person cannot work and engage in substantial gainful activity because of the medical condition, cannot do the work that the person previously did, or adjust to other work because of the medical condition, and that the condition is expected to last for at least a year or result in death. But the healthcare community is so comfortable with their level of implicit bias that it pours over into explicit bias, which is, I have a disability. Well, how long have you been on disability? That is bias. It's important to note that not all people living with a disability are on Social Security disability. The ADA label of disability is not the same definition that Social Security disability uses for inclusion in that program. But why does it even matter? The Americans with Disabilities Act is a civil rights legislation that protects your rights as a person with a disability and supposedly guarantees inclusion in society for people living with disabilities. It's our civil rights law. Since disability was never included in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, people with disabilities have been working with workarounds ever since. The first workaround was inclusion in the Rehab Act of 1973, using Section 504 of the Rehab Act to enforce our inclusion in society, the rights that we have. 504 was being used because 504 gets its enforcement mechanism from the Civil Rights Act. Remember, we weren't included in the Civil Rights Act back in 1964. So I won't go too far down that rabbit hole, but eventually in 1990, we got the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that is supposed to guarantee our rights as people with disabilities to enjoying the same services of our services and inclusion in society that our non-disabled counterparts enjoy. That has not functionally happened because there's no enforcement mechanism. There kind of is, but functionally there's not. And we'll get into all that later as these discussions go on. As a quick overview, the ADA doesn't have the enforcement mechanisms that it should. Lawyers were using Section 504 of the 1973 Rehab Act to get the enforcement mechanisms to use to protect our rights out of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. A Supreme Court decision in 2022, in April, I believe, Cummings versus Premier Rehab Keller. I may have gotten the wording on that a little backwards. They severed our ability to use 504 for enforcement of our disability protections. And it was basically due to a contract loophole. I won't go into it. You can check it out, but I'll probably do another video on this later. I am not a lawyer, so I'm speaking as accurately as I can in my non-legal capacity. But that's the overview of why the Civil Rights Act isn't used to protect people with disabilities. We're not included, ironically. So the ADA was modeled after the Civil Rights Act. What it didn't do is it didn't give us the enforcement mechanism. So the rights of people living with disabilities to access state and local governments, places of public accommodation, including businesses and nonprofits, employment, and more, are all found in the ADA. These ADA rights are not impacted by your participation in the Social Security disability program. The one doesn't depend on the other. There's a lot of topics around ADA as a civil rights law that we still need to address. We'll get to those in other videos, like I said. The very fact that a healthcare provider immediately conflates the ADA law and your status as a person with a disability and the Social Security disability program is very telling. It informs us that this healthcare facility and the staff within has little understanding of their obligations under the ADA or even what a disability is. They don't know the most basic of disability. It also tells us that there's bias, overarching assumptions of what a disability is and is not, and the assumption that all people with disabilities are not working and or are participating in assistance programs. Participation in a program like Social Security disability has no bearing on your civil rights as a person with a disability. And that's important to understand, that those are two separate things. So as a person with a disability, you have rights under the ADA, even if you don't participate in Social Security disability. And we're not having good discussions around the difference between those two things. And we've got society has a pretty low opinion about people with disabilities, their value, their contribution to society, what we are and are not capable of. We are seen as our disability only. We're not seen as the whole human that we are. And we'll discuss all of those later too. So conflating civil rights and protected legal status under the ADA with participation in state or federal assistance programs is a huge problem, especially in the healthcare community. By the time this video is up, I hope to have a click here in the corner to see how and why this fundamental ignorance of disability can be a problem for a disabled person getting the health care that they need. The click here will be an analysis of an actual interaction of a person with a disability attempting to get dental care. And just as an FYI, unless your disability has to do with your teeth, it's actually pretty irrelevant to whether or not you get dental care. To be accessible for health care, you have to be accessible to that person at baseline. And exclusion of dental care because a person has a mobility disability is a very strange thing, because why would you not treat a person's teeth based on the fact that they aren't walking, or people who use wheelchairs often can walk, but they use that assist device for a specific reason? How does that have to do at all with that person's teeth? Their teeth don't have the disability, so why would they be denied care based on a disability that does not impact the clinical treatment of that body part of the teeth? So the case that is analyzed is not actually a patient with a mobility disability. It's a different kind of disability, but again, a disability that doesn't affect care and treatment of that patient's teeth, so long as the facility is accessible. And it's interesting to deep dive into these conversations that are actually happening out in the wild, because people don't believe that it's happening. It's happening right under your nose. Every day, people are being excluded from healthcare settings for no other reason than they have an immutable characteristic like a disability, something that they can't change. The only thing that you can change, the only thing that you could do to get access to healthcare and stop the discrimination at this point is find a way to be less disabled. And definitionally, that's not possible. So we have to have these really difficult discussions about the value of people with disability and the value of them receiving full, equal, equitable treatment that is offered every day to their easier, quote unquote, non-disabled counterparts. People with disability have immense value. They're important to society. They are worth inclusion. We are guaranteed inclusion, but functionally that's not happening. So we're going to keep deep diving until I can stop making these videos. Because if I stop making these videos, then we've actually succeeded in full inclusion. And I hope that's sometime soon, but we're going to keep talking about it, and we're going to say the really ugly stuff out loud as it comes up. So we are all better equipped to fight this fight. See you next time.